Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, the official podcast of the Commerce Next Growth Show, coming up in New York City mid-June. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We have an encore interview for the people this week, a carefully curated executive discussion from our vast back catalog of excellent executive discussions. In this episode from early 2025, our discussion with Chris Nicholas, then president and CEO of Sam's Club. First, we'll be diving into the news of the week, including a very busy earnings week in the home improvement and super scalar sectors. And then after we reprise our interview with Chris, we're back with a celebration of life for irony, and then what is on our respective radar screens. Now, an important note for you, our dedicated listeners, we'll be taking a break next week, so you have to somehow get through your Tuesday without a fresh episode of the Remarkable Retail Podcast. But a reminder, lots of great content in there in case you missed it. For example, our discussion with James Daunt from Barnes & Noble, recently profiled in a great Wall Street Journal article, though we had him first, I'd like to point out. Steve, I teased it in the opening, but Chris, as a new gig in the Walmart family, tell us about it and tell us why we were keen on this interview for our encore episode.
Yeah, I think it's really a great episode. But yeah, Chris, just a few months back now, I think in February, got promoted to run a scrappy little division at Walmart International, $130 billion with aspirations to get to $200 billion. That's with a B by 2028. They operate in 18 countries, 5,700 units, and 500,000 employees. So he seems to be doing pretty well. And I think when you listen to the interview, if you haven't heard it before, you'll understand why. But, you know, in particular, the reason to run this episode again is, for me, two reasons, aside from it just being interesting. One is how Chris talks about what Walmart, kind of a mantra Walmart has now, which is to be people-led, tech-enabled. And I think sometimes we get so hung up on the technology that we don't understand that retail at its core is still largely a human business. But the other thing he talks about is a lot of experimentation. Of course, we keep coming back to that scene. So I think people will find it very interesting and very insightful.
And I was struck by the size of the business, which you lose track of it because it's folded into Walmart. But in and of itself, it, you know, what is it, $80-90 billion business? Like, it's a behemoth in and of itself. So anyway, I was struck with the size and scale, and congratulations to Chris. We'll get to that in a bit. Let's jump right into the news. We had some earnings from the super scalers. Let's kick it off from them first. Let's start with Walmart.
Yeah, well, nice segue here, right? Because Walmart is up first. And of course, Walmart being a huge company is also a glimpse into not the entire world economy, but big chunks of the U.S. and several other markets, as we mentioned, Walmart International in 18 different countries. It was a pretty solid report, but they did strike a bit of a cautious tone for the future, primarily, and probably not too surprisingly, because of fuel costs and inflation in general. But just to hit a few of the numbers real quickly, net sales were up 7.3% with International and Sam's Club. I don't know, it's Chris Nicholas effect there, being the strongest performers within the portfolio. Transactions were up 3%. I thought interesting, average unit retail was only up slightly and definitely lower than the rate of inflation. And I'll come back to a quick comment on that in a second. But again, this great concentration narrative, they added $18 billion in revenue in one quarter on top of an already huge base. So again, like you said about losing track of the Sam's Club numbers within the huge Walmart organization, it also sometimes when you just hear the percents, it's hard to really get your head around that Walmart is growing, you know, a Macy's or a Kohl's every quarter. Right. Continued strength in e-com. They have been way above the industry average. It was up 26% for the quarter. Also 20 plus percentage gains in membership, in advertising. So this drove net income up nearly 19%. Now, as I said, their guidance is a little bit tepid. Part of this is the inflation. Part of this is they did mention that they thought tax returns, which in the U.S. were higher than average, boosted the quarter a bit, and that effect obviously dissipates as time goes on. But I thought the overall big piece of news is they intend to, quote unquote, invest in price. They are very focused on maintaining market share as consumers, their consumer in particular, is very stressed. So they did use this. So it's not quite a promotion like you have suggested, but they did say they would take some of that refund money to invest back in price, which may be a little bit of a story rather than something tangible. But it is true that they would be getting a pretty good refund amount from tariffs. The other thing just tied to this was I saw Kroger. We talked about Kroger a month or so back because they have a new CEO who is ex-Walmart. And Kroger announced that they are going to be lowering prices to really try to claw back some market share. So could be a good time or a better time anyway, for consumers, but maybe a little bit tough on the profitability side for some of these guys.
Let's talk about Target. I put them in the super scaler category. They're not an international retailer, the degree of which Walmart is, but they seem to have a pretty good earnings, which is news for them, actually.
Yeah, as we've talked about, and most people would probably know, at least in the U.S., Target's had a rough go of it for about 3 years now, maybe. So they put up their best quarter in quite a while. Net sales were up almost 7%. And that was well above expectations and definitely an improvement in trend. Sometimes, and I guess I've mostly done this in the context of, say, talking about Macy's, is I think a lot of times when you make some operating improvements, you tend to see that in conversion. It doesn't necessarily take that much to convert a little bit better if you have better in stock, better sales help, better signing, some new fresh merchandise, et cetera. But this was fairly balanced. They clearly had better conversion, but their traffic grew 4.4%. And, that's an unusually high number for a mature retailer. So there does seem to be some sense that consumers are willing to give them another look, or perhaps their experience is a little bit better and they're increasing frequency. So this is still very early in their turnaround. So I wouldn't want to read too much into it. Again, the tariff piece probably elevated the numbers. The inflation piece may have elevated the numbers a little bit. But the other thing I was just going to mention quickly, kind of similar to Walmart, their non-retail businesses, their ad business, I think it's called Rondell, their memberships were up. So, they're getting some of that non-core retail hit as well. That non-retail part was up 25%. So that's pretty strong. And they also saw a little bit of improvement in gross margin, but their overall profitability went back a little bit. They are investing quite a lot in refreshing stores, putting more people on the floor. So that's probably going to be a little bit of a headwind, but hopefully it will continue to pay off. So anyway, encouraging, but I would say we need to see several more quarters before we can really say that the turnaround is really gaining traction.
Well, when I think of these companies that just keep ticking like a Timex watch, I think of TJX because, I put them in the same category from that perspective as Costco, right? Have we ever had a discussion where their results have disappointed us or anyone else? And certainly that's also the case now.
Yeah, I don't think so. I can't remember since we've been, we're here, 5.5 years into this, and they be the keep on ticking kind of retailer. Some of this is what I know you like to call the continuing stampede to value. So when you serve a customer that's more value conscious, and we've got this macroeconomic environment, it's not terribly surprising that you do a bit better than average, but their comps were up 6%, again, on a huge base. They too, though, and maybe this is just reality, maybe this is just a little bit of a conservatism, but they also said they expected their sales rate to slow more to 3 to 4% later in the year. But their operating margin's still really solid, 12%. We don't talk that much about operating margin, but of course, a lot of companies, like probably some of the retailers will talk about coming up, like Macy's and Kohl's, which are more in the low single digit numbers. So we'll see when their results come out in a week or two. But yeah, continuing strong performance. And I have to say, I keep thinking the off-price guys are going to hit a wall at some point, but it does not seem to be happening. Definitely not for TJX.
Well, I almost describe them sometimes as defying gravity, but they really have just locked into a model that nobody else has been able to copy in any way, shape, or form to the same degree. So congratulations to them on both sides of the board. Very strong players here in Canada as well with their properties. Now let's move on to home improvement. Now there seems to be some signs of life in the home improvement category, though they are, they got some pretty soft comps to get through them. for these results, and but maybe some signs of life in their sector. So talk about Home Depot first.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're pretty, there maybe just some embers that are flickering. I mean, to the extent there's any strength, it's more in the professional category. But overall comps, 0.6% actually for both of them. So they're definitely not keeping pace with the retail average or inflation. Both Depot and Lowe's saw their net incomes tick down a little bit. Now, in Depot's case, and I have to laugh because listeners with good memories will remember that about a year ago when we were talking about tariffs, Home Depot said, no problem. That's not going to affect our gross margin. And every quarter since they said that, they've had to comment that their gross margin is getting hit by tariffs. If you look at Lowe's overall results, they're up over 10%, but that's because they have an acquisition, and that is in the professional category. So I think a few pockets of, I think the appliance business was a little bit better, but I would say overall they're still kind of running to stand still. And I think when we get to my what's on the radar screen, I'll have a little bit more to say about part of the reason why that's true and part of the reason why it's probably not likely to change anytime soon.
All right, well, that's a wrap on, let's call it part one of the news. We'll be back talk about a few other things right after our interview with Chris Nicholas, formerly of Sam's and now of Walmart International. Chris, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here. It's sunny Thursday morning in Bentonville.
Well, thanks for joining us. You answered my first question. Where are we reaching you? We crossed paths, not together at the big NRF show. We're going to ask you a few questions about that. But thanks again for jumping on the mic with us. Let's start by learning a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do for a living?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm a retailer. That's what I do for a living. You can tell I'm not from Bentonville, probably from my voice. I originally grew up in the UK, and I've been in retail since I was 14 years old. So I've been a kind of lifelong retailer. We've
had the pleasure of speaking to Walmart executives, Walmart-based executives before, but and Sam's actually, and there seems to be an orientation to the islands to bring in talent. Is there something in the water in the UK that makes for fantastic retailers? What is it about the state of your background that makes you so interested in retail?
That's funny. You know that they say that the British are an island of shopkeepers. I don't know if you know that. That's a very British
Napoleon
thing.
Said that, right? It was Napoleon.
Yeah, exactly. I like to quote the French where possible.
Look, this is such a global podcast now. We're just a minute and a half in, and we're just going around the world.
Broaden the reach of the podcast. Look, I grew up in. There are a lot of folks over here from the UK because Walmart used to own Asda. I didn't work at Asda. I've worked in lots of different places though. So I grew up in this north of England in this place called Hull. It's a place of limited opportunity for everyone, but because everybody's got limited opportunity, no one really knows it. And but everyone needs to work to make the ends meet. And that's how I ended up in retail so young. And I just saw, even from that young age, the power of retail in helping make people's lives better. So if you can help people get access to great items and great value, it just makes the family's life easier. And I just really enjoyed solving those problems for people. And I guess I'm lucky, just really early on finding that vocation. And that launched this crazy journey that I've been on over all of those years, around 9 different countries, leading me here to the US. I've ended up in this amazing business, Sam's Club, and I've got the opportunity to lead it and try and make a difference at a bigger scale.
Well, that's a great segue to next question. Tell us more about Sam's. Not everyone would be familiar. Many would, but not everyone. So we have global audience. Give us a sense of the business, the scale and the scope and how you win.
Yeah, that's I'm always happy to talk about the business. We're a limited assortment club business. So, and we started in 1983. Sam built a business and it started as an experiment, and it's grown to a nearly $90 billion business today, which is kind of fun. But despite the scale, we still feel like a startup. So Sam's Club really captures the essence of Sam Walton's innovative spirit, and we never lost it. It's a membership club that's pioneering retail experiences. So if you think about this limited assortment, like really high quality curated goods at incredible value, so probably 20 to 25% cheaper than even Walmart, let alone the rest of retail. And you get to do that because you run at a really low cost of operation. Right. And then you pass all of that value on to your members. So you make no money on what you sell, and you make all of your money on membership. And that leads you to this conclusion: you have to serve your members in the best way possible. It's like the highest bar for retail. You know, people need to trust you that they're going to really love what you give them and they're going to get value from it. So they'll pay you membership up front each year. And I love that high bar for like serving our members. And so whilst everyone else is focused on price and value, we're evolving our business model to really focus on experience. And we really love the idea that Sam's Club can be an experience business where you get great items and great value. And I guess we can talk about some of that.
Right on, right on. Now, are you based, are the stores in the United States? Do you have any stores outside of the United States?
Sam's Club is in a couple of different countries. We're in China and we're in Mexico, but the biggest part of Sam's Club is here in the US, and that's the business that I'm running right now.
Right on. Now, at one time, I think you popped up into Canada. Do you have any global expansion? Like, is global expansion on the mandate, or is just you're going to go expand in the United States? Is there a particular direction that you take on that?
We're really happy with our footprint today. We've got plenty of work to do to just continue bringing what's great about Sam's Club to the rest of the US.
Okay.
For sure. It's really resonating everywhere, the club model. And I understand why you would ask this really high quality offer that more people would want, but we're super happy with this.
And one of the things I found really interesting learning more about your journey and your background is you've worked at quite a lot of different retailers, different kinds of retailers, but also across multiple countries, multiple continents, in fact. And I'm just curious, what are some of the things you've learned through that experience, that journey, that has really shaped how you lead, and as well as how I guess you think about business strategy and growing the Sam's Club business right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the way I've always thought about this, and every different country and experience I've had just confirms this, is people are more alike than they are different. And what they want is kind of, stable. And that is that they want to live a good life, and they want retailers to bring innovation and joy to their lives, but at great prices and increasingly with convenience. And I've seen that be true everywhere. The thing that I've found, though, is that in different places I've lived, I've found different routes to innovation. So, around Europe, it was all about engineering and efficiency. Around Asia and particularly China and India, it was all about the digital innovations and, this relentless pursuit of innovation to stay ahead of the game. And I think you've got to learn from both sides of this. Like, how do you continuously innovate for the customer and find efficiency? And if you can do both of those things, you get to run a really great business. And I think the thing that teaches me is you don't need to physically work in these places to know all of that. Like, just this sense of constant curiosity is the thing that you need in retail. I love this idea of like loyalty is the absence of something better. And if you believe that, then that will drive a sense of curiosity. And that sense of curiosity mustn't be just in your backyard. It must be global.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I believe you've been in your role as CEO for about a year and a half, I think. Is that about right? Yeah. So, Sam's Club is obviously, as you mentioned, a huge business, been around for quite a while. I imagine on the one hand, you come in and there's a lot of stability and a lot of internal knowledge. But I'm kind of curious, when you came in, was there any observations that really struck you, and maybe something that surprised you, that either made you go, oh, here's a new opportunity that maybe we can really go after?
Yeah, I mean, coming into Sam's Club, the thing that's well known about Sam's Club is it's the real essence of the Walmart culture. And I felt that as I came in. And what I saw, particularly in the last sort of 10 years, is that we've built this really strong foundation, brilliant talent, amazing culture, fantastic clubs, an exciting brand in Members Mark that's really becoming something special, and the beginnings, at least, of a world-class e-commerce business. So like the thing that I was enjoyed seeing is we've got rock solid foundation. Now my job is to say, well, this is the moment for the club model. It's really resonating. Experience, value, the new generations coming to shop with us. And so my job is like, how do we create a long range goal that makes the most of that? And this is going to be a long range trend for the club model. And so my job really is to say, we use that foundation to grow rapidly. And the ultimate goal for me is that for the whole of the business is I want, when you walk into a Sam's Club or when you interact with a Sam's Club, it feels like what it feels like to shop in the future. And I think we've got the opportunity to do that. And the reason is because, and this is where you get into what's surprising about the business is the simplicity of our business allows us to innovate faster and solve problems more quickly than others can. That simplicity is an enormous enabler for us. And so we've got a product and UX organization that thinks about turning business into software, business issues and business opportunities into software. We're elevating our experience in clubs, which we're really excited about. And we're seeing this really exciting, because we feel like these upstart innovator startup, even though we're a big organization, we get to test small scale and then leverage really quickly. And we've got some great examples of that.
It's by the sounds as I'm listening, reflecting on what you're saying, the organization didn't bring you in as a caretaker for a big business. It's really looking for someone to move it forward. So that gets us to the new Grapevine location, which is not too far from you, Steve, right? It's
about
in Dallas.
25 minutes, 30 minutes from me.
So Chris, tell us a couple of high things, the high notes on that store. I mean, I think it's your store of the future, or what you kind of are iterating in the wild, so to speak, with your latest thinking about tech and retail. Tell us a few of the things that are jumping out and that you're really excited about.
Yeah, I'll do that. Look, I think one of the things that's exciting about retail is you're constantly moving and constantly innovating. And I found over the years that the best way to bring everybody together to understand what the physical articulation of your strategy is to build a club of the future. And by doing that, people get to interact with it and you get to evolve it constantly. And we've been doing that for some time now. Before Grapevine, we had this, and we have still got this tiny little club very close to Grapevine called the Sam's Club Now Club. And it is the place where we just create very few members, very small, not a typical club, but it was a test and learn place. And what we've learned, we maybe had 50 innovations there that scaled and hundreds that didn't. And I love that. And think about some of the things like Scan and Go, where more than a third of our members interact with it, or this exit tech. I don't know if you've seen these arches. We've got computer vision arches that we unveiled at CES last year and rolled out to the whole fleet by the end of Q3, uses computer vision and AI to eliminate any friction at the exit. These were all built on capabilities that were foundationally planted in this little club of the future where we just tested and learned. And what Grapevine is doing is it's allowing us to do that at scale. So it's our first true club of the future. And what you'll see there is a lot of what you will see in Sam's Clubs going forward, not just in our new clubs, but also in our fleet more broadly. And what you'll see there is leaning into e-commerce, leaning into inspiration for general merchandise. We don't have any registers in there. I know that sounds crazy, but we just don't need them. And everybody is interacting with that in a really fun way. Fresh and theater are a huge part of that too, as well as us just getting ready for a significantly larger amount of volume. One of my most fun things last year was watching the mayor of Grapevine, who's a very experienced guy, not somebody that you would expect to be talking about AI on the stage, launching Grapevine, talking about the power of artificial intelligence powering the Grapevine experience. And it's like the thing that it teaches you, and I know that you guys know this, but technology that takes friction out of people's lives and allows them to have an enhanced experience and gives them trust and empowers the member, that's something that is across generations. It's not just for the young folks, it's for everybody. And I'm really excited to see that come to life.
Let's. I want to pull on that thread for a little bit. You know, Steve and I, in our careers, we've run Store of the Future. We've talked to people running Store of the Future. I've had experience that the tech, particularly checkout tech, is maybe ahead of the consumer. I was running something not unlike what you're describing. The consumer's like, could you just take me to the checkout bunk? It's too early for me. Could you just build 5 more checkout bunks? Maybe I don't want to go through some archway or something. Like, how do you intersect what you're building for the future with what consumers are saying? I get that they would say, I want less friction in my checkout. But I mean, for many, many years, that's like, could you just open more checkout bunks, as opposed to me having to figure out something else that you like a scan and go. How do you intersect that and take that feedback and not get ahead of your customer, but solve a problem that they actually genuinely have in a way they want it solved, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, it's a great question and profound. I think the philosophy of how you innovate is really important here. If you are people-led, tech-powered, you start to think through how are you solving members' problems versus I have tech. How do I go and apply this to what I'm going to give to my members to save money? This is not a money-saving game. Our job is create delightful experiences. We will not have fewer people, even though we have no registers in Grapevine. We actually have more people, but we're empowering our associates to solve problems. They're called hosts now. They are there for people to talk about the problems they're facing, to help them with the technology, but also help them experience the club, help explain the benefits, help solve issues where you're facing them so that no one's left behind. And I think this idea of use technology to drive efficiency is a small amount of the equation. Using technology to create experiences that people want to engage with, that elevate their life and give them something back, that's the way that you have people-led, tech-powered innovation. And we've been running Scan and Go for a bunch of years now, and we got to this inflection point that allowed us to believe, because we look at all of our data for all of our members, and we just saw that everybody was interacting with it. And regardless of who you are, once you use it, you literally never go back. It's just this incredible like gift of empowerment to a member. The really important thing is you don't nickel and dime on the associates that are around there too. It needs to be an and, not an or. And so I really like this. This is why I mentioned earlier the idea of I want Sam's Club to be an experience business where you get incredible value versus just a place you get incredible value and you have to suck up the friction. That's not the way we want to go.
So, Chris, just pulling on this thread a little bit, one of the things we talk a lot about is having a culture of experimentation and taking maybe more but very sensible risks. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking, I have the benefit that all the listeners won't have, having been in the other store you mentioned here in Dallas. And when that first opened, because it's been quite a few years now, I believe, I would have to say I didn't get it because honestly, I was thinking about it more from, how is this store going to meet its financial goals? And I think that was the wrong lens, particularly hearing what you're saying about all the experimentation you did there. But I guess that means, you may be spending a bunch of money and a lot of the things that you try are not going to work out or they're going to lead you in a different direction. But how do you make that balance between kind of the long-term investment in innovation versus the pressure, particularly as part of a big public company to support the near-term goals that investors want?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. We've got this, actually, you guys would be welcome to come see it. We just opened up, we think is the world's first mass retailer design center. We have a design and innovation center that's just next to our home office. And it's where we bring UX and product thinking to life. All of our associates in our home office are trained in design thinking. And this idea of like, how do you create connected experiences for people? And how do you constantly think about innovation is everybody's job. And the first thing they need to do, and this is the first thing you learn, is all of the good ideas are out there just waiting to be pulled in, either through external ideas that you might want to say, does this apply to some of the problems we're trying to fix? But most importantly is go and speak to the members and go speak to our associates. And when you speak to our members and associates, they tell you where the friction points are. Now, I would I would tell you that what you don't want to do is just go massive and go scale something because something is cool. You have to test and learn. But once you've got the data that tells you that members enjoy this, they will tell you, by the way, you just got to be curious. Then you get to scale quickly. So this design center that we've got next door, we have fabricators to create experiences as they would look like in a club. And then we will bring our associates in, and we will bring real members in, and we will work with them and talk about what works, what doesn't work, how do you like this, what gets in the way. And they help us elevate our thinking. And this empowerment of our associates at the front line and the empowerment of our members is kind of a theme that you're hearing from me, which is, if you do that, you will solve the right problems, and then you will scale the things that work early because people tell you it's a good idea. And I'll just give one other example with Members Mark. I know I mentioned Members Mark earlier. It's a national brand for us that exclusively sells at Sam's Club, and it's a lifestyle brand. So it's food all the way through to patio sets and everything in between. We speak to 50,000 of our members in what's called a Members Mark community, and we ask them to help us think through what innovation should we have. Do you like this yoga pant? Is the pocket deep enough? Do you like the stitching? Do you like the flavor of the coated raspberries with yogurt? Is it what you think? Would you like us to bring a different flavor of tiramisu in? They tell us all these things all the time. And this like empowerment of members to give you rich data that allows you to be better really helps with that speed of innovation that we're building.
We're just about coming up on our time, and I'm going to ask you probably an unfair question because it could be a whole other podcast episode. So I don't know if there's a concise answer to this, but given what you see from your role as well as just in general, some of your experience, what are some of the most important consumer trends you're seeing? Not just within Sam's Club and Walmart, but for the benefit of our listeners that are in different countries, maybe different sectors, some large retailers, some small retailers. But if you had to say, here are 2 or 3 things I would really want to understand better to be able to do some new things or push your strategies forward, or anything top of mind for you?
I mentioned earlier, but there's actually just if you take away the ebbs and flows of quarter to quarter, people want more. They want more value. They want real, true innovation, and they want more convenience. So our job is to give them great items at great value, and we want to give them how they want it. So the omni-channel journey, even within the club model, is becoming something really profound. Consumers are less tethered to legacy brands that used to be on TV and advertised. They want like true innovation. This is where Members Mark, plays a big role, because the value in the innovation we're getting there sets the bar for everybody else. I love brands, but the innovation cycle, you as a retailer, don't take it for granted. You've got to keep pushing it. And then this idea of experience, if you give people something that is more than just what they expect to get, so great items and great values, but you give them time back, you give them energy back, you give them empathy, you give them control of their experience, they will thank you with loyalty and engagement. And I really believe that is something that is true everywhere. And I think AI is going to be a big driver of how we get there faster.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. I really love all the conversation we've had. It's exciting to see not only the success that you guys have had in recent years, but sounds like a lot more in store, no pun intended. So Chris, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. And we certainly wish you great success for the coming year, and perhaps our paths will cross in Bentonville.
All right, we're back. So I did a tease. In case the listeners are mystified what the heck I was talking about, this celebration of life. You and I have been batting about Shein for quite a while. As the listeners would know, I call it the direct-to-landfill model. But they seem to be acquiring a strange bedfellow.
Yeah, so on my Substack, I wrote about this, and I headlined it, Where Irony Goes to Die, Shein acquiring Everlane. If folks aren't familiar with Everlane, they were actually one of the early digitally native brands. Their whole brand was based on this idea of radical transparency. For the last 15 years, really what Everlane has been selling above all else is not that they sell clothes. They sell the truth about clothes. They talked about the factory. Mm-hmm. They talked about their markup. their whole brand basically was, we're the transparent, honest apparel company. And now they're going to be owned by Shein. So Shein is sort of famously and deliberately opaque about what they do. They don't like answering any questions about it. And there's certainly some very questionable things about their business practices. So the transparency brand has been bought by the opacity machine. And why did this happen? Well, you have to follow the money, of course. Everlane has been struggling for years. Some also, we're really testing listeners' ability to listen very carefully. But I teased a few months ago that I thought there were a couple other DTC brands that might be in trouble. This was one that I had in mind because I was hearing some rumblings. There's another that I'm still hearing rumblings about. So maybe we'll talk about that if something happens there in the next few months. But anyway, they got sold for about $100 million. At one point, they were valued at $600 million. So it continues to, or we continue to see some of these high-flying brands crash back down to earth. Yeah. So, when you run out of money, you do desperate things, I suppose, and it'll be interesting to see how.
Grab the lifesaver. Yeah.
Yeah. So, needless to say, there has been a lot of buzz about the selling out in the sellout to Shein.
So let me ask you this question as a strategist and as we think about positioning in retail. Shein has enough resources to buy many, many different companies.
Sure.
So are they buying Everlane, which would clearly be to anyone, including consumers, kind of a bit of a head tilt as my dog would do, but it would also kind of put in the window, is it a way to burnish up their reputation, or is it just, they just want to piss in the wind or piss in a fan or something, because it's the opposite of who they are. So what do you think? What do you think's going on here?
I suppose it's a little bit of, I guess a lot of people call it greenwashing or virtue signaling. I mean, to be fair, Everlane is a tiny, tiny business.
Sure.
And it was not on a very good growth trajectory, obviously. Now, I guess Shein can perhaps, pour some fresh capital in there and give them some scale. But Everlane is teeny tiny in the scheme of the, I don't know what Shein is now, $30-40 billion. So
right.
I don't know. It feels more like a PR stunt. Now, they may, just like when Walmart bought Bonobos and, eventually sold them off, ModCloth, they may run these very independently, and they really just thought here was a chance to get something that we could grow for a very low price. But I suspect it's a little bit more PR, and based upon Reddit and other comments that are out there, I don't think it's selling the brand story very well. I think it's mostly causing sadness among the Everlane faithful and a lot of criticism of Shein. So I don't know. I guess we shall see how this plays out. But so far, I wouldn't say it's getting them the PR that they want.
Well, let's wrap up with what's on our respective radar screens. Talk about what you're thinking this week.
Well, I've mentioned this a couple times over the last year or so, just in terms of paying attention to the bond market. This was a big story shortly after the so-called Liberation Day, where what some of our listeners may know as the bond vigilantes. So there's a lot of folks in the bond world that will really come in and make a lot of noise, sell off bonds, et cetera, when they get particularly worried about, it could be deficits, it could be anything that might point to a recession or stimulate inflation, all sorts of reasons. So we've seen the bond vigilantes show up again, as well as just a general narrative. And this is because interest rates have started ticking up again. So I'm not talking about the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. This is what's actually going on in the market. So the 10-year Treasury, U.S. Treasury touched 4.7%, hasn't been there for several years. The 30-year hit 5.2%. That's the highest rate since before the Great Recession. And so this is largely because inflation is running hot again. And to add to the fun, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, told Bloomberg a few days ago that he thought rates will go higher still. Why does this matter? Well, there's really two reasons. From the consumer perspective, of course, higher bond yields, higher interest rates mean that borrowing money is more expensive. Now, for mortgages, the 30-year rate is more relevant. Mortgage rates have been ticking up again. When you get to credit card rates, car loans, home equity loans, the shorter and medium rates are more relevant, but they're all going up. And so with higher consumer interest rates, that will have a dampening effect on their spending in some way, shape, or form. For retailers or anybody in the business side of things, that, of course, is also something that many retailers will have to worry about because the era of cheap capital doesn't look like it's coming back. So whether they are refinancing, whether they're signing leases, construction loans, whatever it might be, you can expect, or we're seeing higher interest rates right now. And I would say no great sign that this is going to reverse anytime soon. And if you believe Jamie Dimon, who is not always right, but he sits at an interesting intersection and has a pretty good track record of all, they may even be ticking up. So until inflation really starts going the other way, and in the U.S., I would say until we get our arms around the deficit considerably better, these rates might be with us for some time.
Not great news for the folks we were just talking about, the home improvement sector, that's for sure.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was why I didn't mean to tie it back is, yes, when you're talking about businesses that are very tied to the home market, very tied to big ticket sales, appliances, tractors to mow the backyard of your new house or whatever it might be. Right. Yeah, they tend to be quite sensitive to where interest rates are.
Well, for me, ripped from the headlines, some pretty important AI legislation is coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. Last week the president hit the pause for some reason because I don't like certain aspects of it. Now, of course, as we always caveat, these fast-moving stories may have resolved itself. But my thinking isn't really about the legislation itself. It's about what the role of AI has both in our lives, but of course in our industry. We talk about it all the time for retailers. Yep. And really, it gives the U.S. government the opportunity to pre-evaluate AI models to identify security vulnerabilities. And it just got me thinking about all the different forces and influences on these various decisions. In an unrelated story, the largest single donator in the 2026 U.S. midterm election is not a person. It is Andreessen Horowitz, who, of course, the venture capital firm who's backed a
coincidence.
A couple of AI companies, that would be ChatGPT and Claude, Anthropic, a $115.5 million donation from one company, more than any individual billionaire has ever given in American political history. Now, it just makes me think they feel this legislation is probably pretty important, and they want to, as many tech companies oriented to be, want the least restraints possible and want to make sure their voices are heard. And for the retailers and the retailers listening out there, this is all vitally important. You are building business models. We are all building business models around AI and the way it performs and what it does or does not do for our business. So better keep this one on the radar screen, because this has, we're not a political podcast, but this has material effect, I believe, on the future of a very important part of retail, how consumers discover your products, and who's going to be paying, hint, retailers, for all that AI stuff.
It may also foment a revolution, so there's that.
there's that to look forward to.
Welcome to the kleptocracy. Yeah. Look that up, kids.
Well, anyway. And by the way, that's an international story. So whatever happens in this legislation affects Canadians, people in Ireland, people in Europe, people around the world. So very, very important stuff to try to get our heads around, I guess we could say. Now, speaking of getting your heads around, you're going to go on vacation. So I want to take the opportunity to wish you very safe travels.
Thank you.
And I send us a few postcards, if you can find that. Post a few postcards to us and take a few pictures. And if you happen to wander across a few interesting retail things, be sure and post that up in your Instagram or on your Substack. So I wish you safe travels. That's a wrap for the show. You got to catch an airplane. And
I do. Adios.
Adios.
Vamonos. We're vominosing.
You go vominos. Geez, that sounded weird. Don't be vominosing on your vacation, by the way. All right. That's a wrap on this episode of the show. Reminder, once again, we're going to skip next week. So hopefully you'll miss us. But we'll be back the week after with lots of great content. So until then, that's a wrap.
Thanks for tuning in. To help more retail leaders discover the industry's leading podcast, please drop us that 5-star rating and review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy your pods. And for more on my strategic advisory services, keynote speaking, best-selling books, and even more retail industry insights, go to stephenpdennis.com.
If you are a brand or service provider looking to take your influence to the next level, reach out to us for sponsorship, advertising, or event partnerships. And if you want to learn more about my own keynote speaking and advisory practice, reach out to me via LinkedIn.